teachers and students interact with each other and how that whole interaction impact their learning outcome and their well-being. We all know that the classroom is a building block of a school, and within the classroom, what happens is that a student and teacher speak to each other. Sometimes a teacher just deliver a lesson, sometimes only teacher talks, sometimes student talks, sometimes they both have an interaction, sometimes there is a silence. Now, when a teacher goes into the classroom and does something, he or she does that with a belief that whatever we are doing, it would result into learning. It would cause learning in students. And with that belief, they make a lesson plan and they get and execute that. But the whole idea of having this discussion was to look into the research, what research says about what each and every component of that student interaction, student teacher interaction results into student learning outcome. So with me is Professor Karnam Pushpanadham from MS University, Vadodara. I would request everyone else to stay on mute. Okay. For the benefit of this program, I have muted everyone for the time being. And I would ask Professor Pushpanadham to take the dais after a minute. He is a professor of education and psychology at MS University of Baroda. He's working with NAP, with NEPA, with NCRT, and also is a visiting professor in many international universities. So one of the true movers and shakers of what is happening at the health in education. So with this, and he would be speaking for 45 minutes, somewhere around that time. If you have any questions, you can text me via the text box which is available. There is a chat box window which is available at the bottom. You can use that. And after 45 minutes, we will start taking questions one by one. If there are less questions, then we would ask you as well to come online and speak with professor and discuss the actual problem statement. If there are many questions, then I'll start asking on your behalf and we will elicit responses from him. So with this, over to you, Professor Pushpanadham. I'll just unmute you as well. Right, sir, you are audible, please.
It's fine now? Yeah.
Yes.
So, good evening to all of you. It's nice meeting all the educational practitioners cutting across the country to discuss about a very important aspect of our professional practice, talking and teaching. Probably we could not distinguish the difference between talking and teaching, but this distinction is clearly apparent in the students' expressions when they come back and share their classroom practices, experiences with the peers and also the parents. So, friends, one young girl from a primary school comes back to the home and shares her experience of teaching and learning process in the school. As the mother asks, "What did you do today?" And she gently, innocently says, "My teacher never talks, she always teaches." I think this is a very interesting phrase that we as educators need to understand our position in the classroom teaching and the kind of communication that we actually use knowingly, unknowingly in our interaction with the students. I think this is the time that we stop a while, look back, and see that what is actually happening in the classrooms. If our intentions are to promote learning and make the learners as lifelong learners, I think this actually made me interested to discuss today for the next 30, 40 minutes. And then you all, the practitioners, you can reflect on your actual practices from your classroom friend. And finally, we will come out with certain ways and means through which we can make use of our communication more engaging, more inspiring, and more encouraging our students to learn, as well as it encourages us to become an effective and innovative teachers. Friends, let us conceptualize a school, what it is. It is an institution, it is an organization, and it is the organization which is established with certain intentions. And we also often narrate this as a miniature society. But this institution has a very distinguished responsibilities. It provides a structured environment with its own rules, norms, roles, values. And the purpose is to socialize individuals, prepare them adult life, and transmit cultural heritage, knowledge, skills, so on and so forth. So this is an institution which prepares the young generation for the future and to make them understand the kind of the dynamics that happens within the society and how they can really perform their responsibilities in a more responsible citizen. So this is the function of any school that you talk about. Probably this you find cutting across the globe. In all the countries, you find an institution of this kind, deliberately established to transmit the cultural heritage, accumulated knowledge, the values and skills in a more organized and structured environment with set of rules, norms, roles, etc. and etc. Now, the basic aim of this organization is to provide learning and to make learners learn what is required. We also introduce a different character called a teacher. A teacher is someone who is expected to make these things happen within the classrooms at a micro level learning environment. And the institutional head is someone who can make the institution to create such kind of environment for the learners to learn and to accomplish the objectives with which the institution is established. So my fundamental idea is to see school as a social organization, as a miniature society, and a structured institution. And within the structured institutions, the communication is something which is very, very important. Though we call it as an act of teaching. An act of teaching is something that happens within the micro learning environment, which you call it as a classroom, in which there are two important actors. One is the teacher, other one is the learner, the students. And the research says the kind of talk that happens between the teachers and the learners within the classroom context that has a direct influence on their long impact oriented learning. Therefore, what happens in the classroom? What is that classroom communication that happens? And how do the learners perceive about the classroom transactions that happen? How do teachers position themselves into that environment of the classroom learning? I think these are certain things which are really fascinating for us as educators. And let us take a self-reflection about our dispositions in the classrooms and how we are making an impact into the classroom learning. So what I planned is the next 30 minutes, I will take you to a journey into our classrooms. I would like all of you to experience that what actually we do in the classrooms as prospective teachers, and then try to understand that how our dispositions are making an impact which are unnoticed impacts on the learners. Therefore, we will have a chance to reposition our classroom practices. I think that is the responsibility which is given to me by Mr. Himanshu Srivastav. And let's see that how we will be successful in next 30 minutes of the time given to us. The friends, we all know the classroom is not merely a site for information transmission. It's not something the teacher who is considered to be the one who knows will deliver the things to the one who doesn't know or needs to know. Or it is a kind of a more knower to less knower, a kind of interaction. So the classroom is not seen as a site for such information transmission. Therefore, what it is a discursive space where language shapes learners' perceptions and of themselves and their potential. I think this is the very essence of education, as the many philosopher talks about. You make learners to know themselves, understand their perceptions, know their potential, and therefore the things automatically emerge in the kind of conversation that we design and implement in the context. Therefore, every word that we speak, that a teacher speaks, carries an implicit message. It can either close down thinking or open up possibilities for growth. We all know the teacher plays a major role in promoting the classroom communication or disturbing the classroom communication. Therefore, every word that comes out from the teacher's discourse has a strong implicit message to the learners. It can close down their thinking. That's how the subjects become more complicated and the subjects become more fun and passion to the learners. And the moment teacher says that you cannot learn a complex subject like mathematics or science, probably that would be a strong message to the learner, and that actually diminishes his anxiety and diminishes his aspirations and interest to know more about the subject. Therefore, friends, today we must see what is the teacher talk is all about. What is teaching as an act is all about. And how every word of a teacher in the process of talking has an impact and an implicit message to our learners. And therefore, we need to see the kind of a dialogue that happens between the teacher and the student. It is the crucial element for effective classroom teaching. And this dialogue is not the transmission of the knowledge which is prescribed by a particular textbook board, maybe the lessons, the contents, but the basic idea, the hidden process that is deeply respected and valued in the classroom communication is the exchange of ideas. It is understanding the expectations, knowing the interests, aspirations, intentions, addressing the questions, and listening to the responses and interactions between the teachers and the students. Therefore, the whole idea of teaching is not merely from transmitting or transmission of the knowledge from the textbooks to the learners to understand as a process of exchange of ideas, understanding the expectations, interests, aspirations, intentions, addressing the questions, responses, interactions. I think these are set of activities that usually happens in the classroom context, and these acts are expected to make teaching learning process more dialogic in nature, not a monologue in nature. Therefore, this dialogue significantly influences student engagement and learning outcomes, and a lot of research studies have come out with a close positive relationship between the classroom dialogue and communication. Meeting these important acts has a direct relation to learning outcomes of the students. And therefore, we need to understand that what we basically do as a teachers, we usually stick to such a typical teaching acts in the classroom. Probably the things that we learned during our pre-service teaching in terms of structuring your content, preparing a lesson plan, or even to that extent, you talk about the teaching skills and teaching competencies. Therefore, our communication in the typical classroom at the micro level becomes a technical rather than personal. I think here the student identifies that my teacher never talks, she only teaches. And the moment she says, my teacher never talks, she only teaches, probably she understood the classroom communication in a more technical way by having certain patterns. When the teachers come to the classroom, they exhibit these patterns more or less the similar irrespective of the disciplines that they hold. I think this is a very interesting thing that we need to notify. And several researchers basically talks about when a teacher enters into a classroom, he behaves as a teacher and expects the teaching acts are more important in the classrooms. Therefore, he performs those acts in a patterned way. So let us understand that what is actually we mean by teaching acts in the classrooms. So the teaching acts from the research talks about they're the distinct purposeful actions of teachers performs while engaging with students to promote learning. This is what the pre-service teacher education programs essentially train the novice teachers on various aspects of the teaching styles and teaching competencies. And these acts are not random behaviors. They are not random behavior. They are well structured. They are intentional, instructional moves that reflects about a particular teacher's the philosophy, objectives, and understanding how learning occurs, which has a strong theoretical base and which has a strong the training component of the teachers into those aspects. So if you try to see the teacher behavior in the classrooms, let us reflect on your own practices as a teacher when you get into the classroom, what usually you do it. Consciously, unconsciously, your behavior in terms of the teaching act goes on in a very definite pattern of your behaviors. And these patterns are typically noted by your learners. Therefore, the learner says, my teacher never talks, she always teaches. So he is able to distinguish the teaching and the talking, and therefore he would like to have teachers more having an integrated approach rather than a talking approach, rather than a teaching approach. Therefore, the talk in the classroom have a better learning outcomes. So friends, if you try to understand the teaching acts, how teachers are trained today, whether you talk about the teacher training programs, you're talking about the pre-service teacher training, we expect every teacher to act three important the instructional domains. One is the instructional acts. The second important act is the managerial acts. And the third important act is socio-emotional acts. Usually you find or consciously, unconsciously, you try to operate your classroom communication, switching on from instructional to managerial to socio-emotional acts. And if you try to elaborate these acts, what kind of teacher behavior when he or she performs the instructional acts? I'm talking about my teacher teaches. My teacher teaches from the domain of instructional aspects. What she does, probably she asks questions, she explains the content which she prepared, or she demonstrates, she provides some kind of reinforcement, and the addendum to class she summarizes and recapitulates what she taught within a specific frame of time, whether it is 45 minutes of interaction or 1 hour in the classroom, the timing. Therefore, the typical pattern of teachers when they go to the classroom, consciously, unconsciously, happens by the way of explaining, by the way of questioning, by the way of demonstrating, reinforcing, summarizing. And if not, there are certain things teachers does in terms of the managerial acts: planning, organizing, directing, monitoring, observing, time management, maintaining classroom discipline. I think most of the time, the classroom communication is dominated by these different type of activities, which we strongly believe that these are the professional practices of teachers which makes an impact on learning. So friends, these models are the models emerged from the behavioristic models, where we believe that there is a stimulus and a response. Therefore, our actions are essentially a patterned actions. You initiate and you respond and you give a kind of what you call the feedback. See, the popular model is IRF models of teaching patterns you find in the classrooms. Teacher initiates, teacher listen to the responses, elicit the responses, and the teacher gives the feedback. And this is the structure and the chains of such behaviors happens within the time that actually taken place. So if you see a large number of research into the classroom practices, what teachers do in the classroom in terms of their instructional acts or in terms of their managerial acts. Certain researchers clearly said that if you see the prominent teacher patterns while teaching in the classrooms, in terms of questioning, in terms of explaining, in terms of directing, in terms of providing feedback, and in terms of social and emotional talk. Friends, the research says 40% of our classrooms, you can give your feedback at the end, whether these facts and figures are really suitable and relevant to your professional context. So the 40% of the time that we spend in the classroom at the micro level teaching is on questioning. And 25% probably on explaining. And 20% time that we spend on directing. And 10% of our time we use it for providing feedback. And only 5% on social and emotional tasks. So these patterns have observed across the disciplines, across the stages, and this is a typical teacher behavior. That's how the learner says, my teacher never talks, she only teaches. So a learner observing various type of teachers across the schooling stage, from year to year, from discipline to discipline, from teacher to teacher, having these structured patterns of behavior, what you call teacher initiating, eliciting responses, providing feedback, questioning, explaining, directing, providing feedback. I think these were certain tasks usually the teachers consciously, unconsciously perform in a typical classroom context. But what is most important, the research says, the socio-emotional acts, which are also very, very important. What are these? Socio-emotional acts of the teachers essentially talks about motivating, encouraging, acknowledging feelings, building rapport, conflict resolution. Probably these emotional social acts require teacher talk rather than teacher teach. So now, how to understand the importance of these emotional acts, which are very important for teachers to integrate into the teaching and then unfold the kind of the teaching acts usually they exhibit in a typical classroom practice. So when you talk about motivating, encouraging, and acknowledging the feelings, you are personalizing the learning process. So the question is whether the teaching learning process need to be personalized. Therefore, there is a wholehearted participation and engagement of the learner into the dialogic process. So breaking the monologue into a dialogue, I think, which is very important. Thereby, we understand the importance of teacher talk within the classroom context. The importance of promoting social emotional well-being of students within the classroom communication becomes more important. So how can we do that? And what is the other side of the teacher talk, which actually essential that we need to understand today? Friends, when you talk about the questioning act, it is the feedback that you give, what you call the content acts, the instructional acts. And the managerial acts supporting the instructional acts for discussion. Fine. But the socio-emotional acts, like encouragement to enhance the effectiveness of all others, this is an integrated system that we need to understand today. Even the national education policy talks about the transmission of knowledge in the classrooms. We must unfold it to transformational learning. So for transformational learning, we need to think about transformative teaching and learning process. Therefore, friends, I always look back to the kind of a reflection that a young learner talking about my teacher never talks, she only teaches means she has been understanding the patterns of teachers' behavior from subject to subject, from teacher to teachers over a period of time, and what he or she expects from teachers to actually disposition themselves to the classroom process. Therefore, what is teacher talk now? When you say the teacher talk in the classrooms has the greatest influence on the learning. So what is teacher talk? Teacher talk is a verbal communication style of a teacher. Whether it is commanding or it is a convincing. Whether it is instructing or whether it is inspiring. The friends, you know the difference, an inspiring tone that impacts the learner and an instructing tone. Whether you are commanding or you are actually convincing. I think we need to understand what is that language that we use when we communicate to our learners. Therefore, to what extent we can break the monotonous monologues, didactic approach, where the teacher-centric tones that we use in the classrooms, therefore, the learners distinguish your teaching with the talking that you talk about. Therefore, teachers' talk sets the tone and pace of classroom environment. What is that environment that you are talking about? The environment where there is an innovation, where there is an engagement and where there is a free will to express the ideas and the absence of fear. Friends, several research studies clearly showed that the learning is not a rote memory. Learning is not something that you memorize things. You listen to teacher and you reproduce. The learning is a generative learning. The new ideas, new construction of the knowledge within mind, and the new creative ideas that can emerge out of the conversations that happens in the classrooms. So these new ideas, the creative ideas, can only emerge when there is an absence of fear. Fear is the obstacle of promoting creativity in the classrooms. When the students freely communicate what they have and talk to the teachers as they talk to their colleagues, their peers, I think the real ideas which are there in the mind of the learners can eventually come out. I think this is what the research says. The absence of the fear is the beginning of the creativity. And the several resources, it is the classrooms that is killing the creativity of the learners because the classrooms are well-structured classrooms. And my teacher never talks, she only teaches. That's the kind of a classroom that we are talking about. And therefore, how to eliminate the fear in the minds of learners, in the minds of teachers, and therefore the real creativity can emerge and the real conversations takes place in the classrooms. Moreover, classrooms are the places where the co-creation of the knowledge is possible. Otherwise, in a didactic approach, in a monologic approach, the approach is only to share what is given in a context or imposing the learners to follow what you think or your line of thinking. So the monologues or the didactic approach is a one way, the teacher-centric, and it has a no scope for creativity that we really need to promote in our teaching learning process. So effective teacher talk can motivate students and foster positive learning climate. And therefore, it says, not an amount of teacher talk, which is important. It's not the teacher talk all the time, some unwanted things and undesirable things, but it should have a kind of a clear, interactive, comprehensive, and the interactional features within the classroom context. And therefore, how to engage our learners into the classroom communication. Therefore, it comes under a frame of teacher talk, my teacher talks. So the moment you say that teacher talks, the teacher is open to ideas. My teacher listens to me. My teacher accepts my ideas, and thereby you're creating a kind of what you call social capital. So friends, instructional strategies and the patterns of teacher behavior is something we exhibit what the learner identify as a teacher teaches. And the informal moves, more personalized approach to understand the learners, opening up their voices, and also encouraging them to put their steps from one level to another level is what the students define as the teacher talk. So what is the impact of the student talk and the student engagement? So active teachers talk can increase student participation and attentiveness. We all know that there's nothing new about it. We know that when you allow teachers, to engage students into the conversations, sometimes the kind of time which is given to you is not sufficient. At the end of the class, you feel that you are actively engaged in knowing things and you are in the process of co-creation of knowledge. This is what moving from behavioristic perspective to constructivistic perspective of knowledge. So the engagement is nothing but the curiosity. And this should happen at all levels in the classroom communication. And this should be a cognitive engagement, social engagement, and emotional engagement. Cognitive engagement talks about thinking, reasoning, and also the critical creative components of puzzling the mind. And you actually migrate your neurons, the connectivity and construction of the knowledge. And the social engagement is conversations, dialogues, opinions, acceptance, rejections. This kind of a social learning approach within the classrooms. And the emotional and the social emotional learning is something you take it to your heart that you actually done it. This is what you like it. This is the line of thinking you believe to happen. So in this process, actually, what we see at the larger course of time is the learner is evolving from listening to a teacher to a self-learner and a lifelong learner. Friends, when I'm talking about this is the purpose of any institution that you talk about. A learner has to evolve from listening to a teacher to a self-learner and then a lifelong learner. And this kind of what you call mobility is possible when you put the cognitive engagement, social engagement, emotional engagement of the learners in place in the classroom communication. And that becomes what you call more personal, more caring rather than commanding, more personalized approach, and more interpersonal rather than instructional. Therefore, how to do that? How to do that in the classrooms with all kinds of conditions in which we need to work. Probably this is something which is happening in your minds as teachers, or this is something which is actually in your mind as educational leaders. How to make it happen? Probably you need to unfold the timings and the structures and expansion of your classroom interactions. So friends, there is a way to deal and make our classrooms more inspirational and rather than instructional. So how we can do that? It can be done with a strong belief system. We all know the behavior is the cause, the effect of our behavior, our belief. So the belief causes the behavior. So what do we believe in terms of teaching, in terms of classroom process, in terms of our disposition and responsibilities in the classroom? If we believe that teacher talk has an indirect influence that includes accepting feelings, praising, encouraging, accepting or using student ideas, asking questions in ways that invite student input. I think if we believe this, if we believe that the teaching is not performing those instructional acts or managerial acts, but the teaching is also an element of talking, and the talking is more personalized, and the talking which helps the students to use the creativity and open up their ideas. And do we believe that my teaching essentially essentially a place where it provides opportunities for students to come out with new ideas and to co-create that knowledge in the classroom context. And therefore, the theoretical background, moving from behavioristic models, you talk about teacher initiates, teacher provides the response, or teacher gets the feedback, a very typical the technical model of teaching that are being practiced, cutting across all levels in schools, need to move from what you call a constructivistic and humanistic learning. A teaching need not be a serious, what you call a place where the teacher speaks with seriousness without any smile on the face and expects the students to sit quietly with a serious face and listen to what teacher teaches. So this kind of an approach predominantly seen in schools. That's the reason the student says, my teacher never talks, she only teaches. So friends, how it can be? If you see the theoretical base of constructivistic theories of Vygotsky talks about how to encourage students to perform to their maximum level of learning. He used the word of zone of proximal development. We must encourage students to perform to the level where they can perform by themselves without seeking any help. And the humanistic perspective says they must enjoy the every process of their learning. I think these are the two important things that demand the teacher talk in the classrooms. So what it says, happy teachers can only make learners happy. This is a very important thing. Only happy people can make others happy. And only happiness is the absence of fear. And the absence of fear can only lead to creativity and innovation. So friends, taking the ideas from Vygotsky and the humanistic psychologists, the Carl Rogers and Paulo Freire, a teacher talk is the most vital for the learning outcomes of the students. And the teacher talk predominantly with the language of possibility and the progress. And the language of possibility and the progress is essential in the teaching talk. And the teacher talk is less of commanding and more of caring. And the teacher talk, which is less of instructional and rather more of interpersonal and inspiring. So let us see that what is the element that you are talking in terms of the language of caring, the language of possibility, the language of hope, the language of progress. So the language of progress is the heart of teacher talk in the classrooms. So it is the words and the metaphors and the tone that we usually communicate in the classrooms. What do we communicate? It should be the growth rather than the deficiency. Friends, this kind of a caring and also a language of hope, the language of the possibility, which conveys and which builds the bond between the teacher and the students. So the growth rather than the deficiency should be the tone of the language in the teacher talk. The potential rather than the limitations. It is not that you could explore versus you cannot do that. There is a huge difference between these two expressions. You could explore is more personalized, more encouraging, more inspiring, rather than you cannot do that is more of instructions and commanding. And the language of possibility and the progress is a hope rather than the fear. The hope is, let us try again, rather than you failed. And I think, we need not give much examples of this kind because we have to reflect about our classroom dispositions when we go to a classroom to teach a particular subject to our learners. It has to be the teacher talk, essentially the language of possibility and the language of progress. Then it is an agency rather than the passivity. The language of possibility encourages the agency rather than the passivity. You have the tools to find out. I will tell you the answer. There are two things. One is to allow students to explore by themselves individually, collectively. Therefore, even the wrong answer is the step towards reaching to the right answer. Therefore, these kind of the actions essentially reflects the belief that learning is continuous journey, where mistakes are part of progress, and therefore a language of hope, a language of possibility, a language of what you call the progress is the essential element of the teacher talk. Probably these are things are missing in the classrooms. As the learner says, my teacher never talks, she only teaches. Predominantly dominated by those teaching talks, the teaching acts, questioning, responding, eliciting, directing, instructing. I think we need to have some component of teacher talk which creates the social capital within the institutions with the tone of the language of possibility and the language of hope and the language of progress. So what are the pedagogical strategies to promote the such kind of teacher talk in the classrooms? One is the dialogic teaching, the dialogic approach. Probably when you see in the pedagogical areas, the dialogic approach is unvalued as a pedagogic model, because the dialogic model opens up discussions. The dialogic models have the possibility of getting into different ways of thoughts. And therefore, we wanted to have more structured, and the structured approach of teaching acts becomes what you call more convenience for the teachers to perform in the classrooms. Sorry. The second important aspect is formative feedback. In the name of formative feedback, we only conduct certain examinations during the period of learning, and we call it as a formative, the feedback that you take it up. And therefore, people say the CCA, the continuous comprehensive assessment, is misunderstood as a continuously conducting, assessments. So what is most important is you replace summative judgments with the guidance that highlights next steps. At the summative assessments, probably you would like to take some kind of a judgment on the part of the learning. But when you talk about the formative, you talk about giving a helping hand to the learners at all levels of learning. Thereby, he will be able to surpass those difficulties he faces. Therefore, he will be able to communicate to you. Therefore, there is a strong bonding between the learner and the teacher through a teacher talk. A teacher talk is possible when you allow the student to talk as well. And the growth mindset language, as I was talking about, the language of possibility, a language of faith, the language of hope, the language of what you call the courage to innovate and create. I think this is something which is a very, very important thing that we need to imbibe. And reflective questioning. Ask what could you try next? What you have learned from this attempt. So you are personalizing the learning experiences. Therefore, the student talk from their own experiences and perspectives will help the teacher to actually put them into the main track. Friends, the most important for the teacher talk and the teacher talk with the student talk is possible when there is an empathetic listening. To what extent we listen to the students' expressions, their difficulties in understanding. What is the time frame with which we can really reorganize our classroom process? So the empathetic listening validates students' feelings. This builds emotional safety and fosters curiosity. And thereby, the student really feels that he is heard by his teacher and is directed and his ideas are acknowledged. I think that kind of a feeling, which is very, very important, and that is the real engagement of the learners into the classrooms. And that actually translates the teaching learning process as an engaging process, as an inspiring process, and as an enjoying process. And it is a vision oriented the learning environment. It's not something that you could finish what you learn it, but what you are going to do in the next couple of years that you actually talk about it. So friends, these are certain things that we need to imbibe into our teaching learning process. Therefore, along with the teaching acts, we also need to integrate more deeply, more consciously into the teacher talk. And the teacher talk is nothing but the talk with the language of hope, with the language of possibility, with the language of the progress. So at the end, let me conclude that effective teacher-student dialogue is essential for fostering active learning. If we believe this, we need to check our behaviors in the classrooms, what we do in the classrooms as a teaching acts. We need to find out the spaces for teacher talk, for the student talks. We need to find out the way through which the language that we use can be beneficial to the learners, can be encouraging and inspiring. Therefore, the language of possibility and progress is not just a teaching technique, but an ethical stance, a commitment to seeing every learner as a capable of growth. I think this is what we need to keep in mind as a belief. If we believe that no child is left behind and every child is capable of learning, therefore we need to modulate, reorganize our tone, our voice in the classrooms and create that classroom as a community of learners, and we open to the creation and the co-creation of the knowledge. That's what is most important. When teachers use the words that open space for reflection, risk-taking, and hope, they transform the classroom into a community of learners where the learning is an act of becoming. Friends, this is the essence of the teacher talk and student talk. It is not a mechanical, technical process of teacher transmitting the information in the classrooms, rather than creating that community of learners where the learning is an act of becoming. I think this is what the outcome of the teacher talk that happens in the classroom context. In such learning environments, progress is not merely measured in grades. I repeat it again. In such environments, what is that such environment? Where there is a teacher talk. A teacher talks with the language of hope, the language of possibility, the language of progress. The progress is not only measured in grades, the marks that the students learn, but in confidence, in curiosity, and the courage to imagine new possibilities. And this is all about learning. This is all about education. This is all about the purpose of the institutions that we intentionally created for education. So, friends, effective classroom communication is the art of connecting minds and hearts. And if you are only focusing about the minds through your teaching acts, let us integrate our way of dispositions with also the art of connecting both the minds and hearts. It combines intellectual clarity with emotional intelligence, structure with flexibility, and authority with empathy. I think these things should go together. We need to have the emotional intelligence with clarity. We need to have the structure with flexibility. We need to have the authority with empathy. And this is what required. And the teacher talks is the most important. important thing to invigorate the talk of the learners, the open talk of the learners. Ultimately, communication defines the quality of education because teaching is not at its core is an act of meaningful conversation. I think this should be the belief. After all, teaching at its core is an act of a meaningful conversation, the creation of social capital, a creation of community of learners. And learning is, after all, for being and becoming. With this, I stop my presentation, and I'll be very happy to listen to your expressions, your ideas, your experiences. Over to Himanshu.
Thank you, sir. If you can unshare your presentation, then people, all of our students would be able to see you
That's
as
fine.
well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So, sir, now I would request everyone to start posting their questions in the chat box. Meanwhile, I have already received some of them. The first question which is there, so I am speaking them on behalf of school leaders and teachers both right now.
Yeah.
We are talking about generally most of our teachers have been habitual of the process which is you said transmitting, that they will transmit the knowledge and student will catch it, and that's how they plan out their timetables. When we are talking about building engagement and questions and answers, they start fumbling at the place where they say, how will my subject or my syllabus would be completed if I will bring so many occasions of engagement within that? So this is one question which I would like to you to answer to give your comments upon. But before that, I will just take 1 minute to tell everyone that Professor Pushpanadham would be present physically in our conference at IIT Delhi, which is happening on 22nd and 23rd of December. And it has a steering committee which has professors from IIT. Professor Pushpanadham is also one of them. And this has been created to answer all these questions, one of which we are taking up right now. We have two tracks, one for school founders and management, and another which is for school leaders. And the topics have been created with the intention that when you will go back from this conference, many of the questions which comes to your desk on a day-to-day basis, you should be able to finalize. With this, I'll come back to the question which I have asked, sir. Sir, how to address this question which teachers often comes up to the school leaders that if I'll bring so many engagement pieces into my classroom, how would I'll be able to finish my syllabus?
I think this is a very valid question. And this is the question which we need to think collectively. The moment we focus the content, the syllabus, of course, which are very important. Therefore, our positions in the classrooms are predominantly that what you call the teacher teachers. Hello?
Just a second, sir. Someone is speaking. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
The question that raised is a very relevant question in terms of why do teachers that teach in the classroom rather than talk? I think that's is essentially the question is all about. You know, the purpose of a teacher teaching in the classrooms with a typical the teaching patterns, asking questions, explaining, and at the back of the mind there is always a consciousness about their completion of the course and preparing the learner for the examinations, and also certain what you call the consequences of their performance results. And therefore the focus is more dominantly on what is the teaching the concepts and preparing the learner for the examinations. This is what happening. because you are in a context and the context demands this. But at the same time, you as a teacher, the teacher in you, a teacher in you also need to be invigorated in terms of what I'm teaching in the classroom, whether it is going to help the learner to make his life and living. And if you strongly believe that the learning is for life and living, and I'm sure most of you will agree, the learning is not for examinations alone, but at the larger canvas, it is for the life and living. Therefore, there is an element of bringing what is the relevance of the content that you teach in the classrooms, and then have a kind of a dialoguing in bringing the concept into the community, the concept into the reality. And then you have a possibility of what you call the teacher talk and student talk. And unfortunately, the focusing more on the examinations and then making preparations, repetitions, practicings, and that actually makes the learner much boring. And thereby he says, my teacher never talks, she only teaches. Friends, to translate this into an effective, relevant, community-oriented activities, the NAP talks about experiential learning. So the experiential learning essentially talks about create that space for learners to talk, to have a conversation, to have a dialogue with the peers as well as with the teacher. That's most important. It is not the rules which are there, but sometimes, as I said, you also invigorate your teacher in you. What is your conviction that you have within you? What do you strongly believe in? I think that will find out the space for you to actually balance your content and your context. The content and the context both are important for effective learning.
Thank you, sir. There have been couple of questions of one kind, so I will ask them on their behalf. You also said at one go that engagement is equal to curiosity. Now, there are some questions who are saying that we find some student in the classroom who are just not ready to engage, no matter what we do. So, how can we deal with that situation?
See, this the notion of students' disengagement in the classroom process. If you study the reasons for disengagement, there are few studies conducted why students become passive in the classrooms. And there are very interesting findings. They are not the reasons from the student itself. And there are certain reasons which are predominantly coming from the teacher teaching and also the institutional environments, the learning environments that is created within the classrooms. The student wants to talk, and the talk which is identified by the teacher as irrelevant. Therefore, the irrelevant talk as perceived by the teacher, as enjoyed by the learner, there is a kind of a mismatch between in the classroom context. Therefore, every talk of a student has a value, has an expression, has a feeling, and has a purpose. And if that is understood by the teacher in the talking process, I think every student becomes active, and every voice of the students you can find in the classrooms. I think the disengagement of the students is not because the personality of the learner, but it is the environment that is created by the teachers and the tone that is predominantly happening in the classroom communication. And therefore, I say a teacher talk is more informal in nature, more reaching out to the learner, and more open to the learner, and more freedom. That flexibility has to be created.
Thank you, sir. So it's like I think a tough response to those who were seeking a answer from you. If you have disengaged students, you have to go back and look at the environment created by teacher and the school, and whether the teacher is actually disregarding whatever the student wants to speak as irrelevant. So I think what professor is saying, rather than blaming the student, why don't we go back and look at the entire ecosystem which is making the student disengaged? So I'll go to the next question now, sir. You have been into the profession of training teachers for many decades now. And I have been into just for 15 years, but I have seen many teachers who have been wrongly taught that their core responsibility is to go into the classroom and transmit, and that's it, and come back. Taking a teacher who is at the left part of the spectrum to taking to a place where you are talking about the pedagogical tools like dialogic teaching, formative feedback, reflective questioning, growth mindset. How much time would it take for a school leader to take a sincere teacher with false beliefs from this end of the spectrum to that end? How much time should we give to that teacher?
Uh, yeah, the time, teaching cannot be a one-time activity. Let me be uh, very clear to all my teaching friends, those who are into the teaching profession for long years. A teacher cannot be made as a one-time activity. It is a lifetime process. It is an evolving process. A beginning teachers to a moderate teachers to effective teachers, and it goes on and on. But what is most important in the entire process of transforming an individual into a teacher into an efficient teacher, it is the sensitization process. If the teachers are sensitized about their roles and responsibilities, revisiting their belief systems about their profession, about their institution, about their responsibilities, I think that is the beginning of transforming teachers into effective teachers. That's the beginning where the teachers really understand that the teaching is nothing but an effective conversation. Effective conversation with your student is nothing but the teaching, and that kind of teaching can be created if the teachers are sensitized about their roles and responsibilities. It is not with the training, it is not with the time, and it is the lifelong process. So how to sensitize teachers is the crucial part that we need to do if you really want to make the teaching workforce, which is what you call passionate, into creating that learning community.
All right, sir. Thank you. You also said that when you look at the way a teacher teaches or the way they plan for the teaching, it reflects on her philosophy of teaching or the kind of training she has got or he has got.
Yeah.
Now, when a school leader is looking at recruiting teachers or getting some teachers, what is the right approach to keep looking at that particular philosophy or take on a teacher and then retrain them into the new philosophy?
See that if you uh, see the entire perspective of making a teacher, teacher making, you need to have certain philosophical, ideological principles. A structured approach to teaching is essential. And from there, the teacher understanding the context and becoming flexible for meaning making. I think this is what the teaching is all about. The ideological, philosophical background to make it more relevant into the context in which teacher is performing and helping in meaning making. I think this is what the process is all about. It's not something that you leave your ideological, philosophical base and get into more pragmatic into the context. I think how to maintain a balance and how to interlink the ideological and the pragmatic views of teaching. Therefore, you understand the context and you evolve as a innovative educator in the context. So unfortunately, what is happening now, most of the teachers, they perform their responsibilities in the classroom communication, classroom conversations in a well-patterned way, irrespective of the disciplines, irrespective of the teachers, irrespective of the levels. One should understand a pattern way of teacher behavior in the classroom. We have a research model which identify the classroom interaction analysis. And several authors have come out with different ways. And one popular is the Flanders classroom interaction analysis. What do teachers do in the classrooms? What are the teacher behaviors? And there you identify the pattern behavior, the structured pattern behavior of the teachers cutting across the disciplines, cutting across the levels. And that has to be broken down. I think this is what the teaching which is required. We need to come out with the contextually scaffolding the learning environment, making contextually relevant, and flexibility within the rigidity. I think these are all the tactics of teaching, and this comes for a bit of time. I'm sorry, when teachers really reflect on their practices. This is what most reflection on your practice will enable you to make your teaching more what you call teacher talk.
So, sir, let's take a minute and reflect right now. I would request you to take a glass of water. You said that it
Thank
is
you, Master. Yeah.
it is actually detrimental to get into a pattern, right? We should be flexible. Right now, this session is attended by school leaders and school teachers alike. And right, so as you said, we have to reflect whether we are actually imposing a same pattern of lesson planning, irrespective of the age and subject and topic. And if we are doing that, we are actually, in a way, taking us away from getting into the context and asking the question of what Sir said, whether it would help them in becoming a lifelong learner or lead a good life. So that is a good reflective question which is coming out of this answer. We have a question from Madam Sarika. Says, what are some signs that a task is truly effective, not just completed, but actually impactful in learning terms?
Instead, I speak. I would like to listen from one of the learned teachers or administrators that we have on this August gathering. Can
Yeah,
we?
if anyone would like to ask a question, they can raise a hand and I'll give you the speaking rights so that you can explain your question in detail so that professor can understand it better and then answer it. Is there anyone who would like to ask the question themselves? I have, I think a question came from Madam Sarika and Madam Kalyani. Anyone there who would like to ask a question, just raise their hand.
Yeah.
Or you can just unmute your mic and speak. So, Mr. Munish he wants to ask a question. Sorry, Priya Munish Sharma. So, please ask Priya ma'am. I have given you the permission.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah. Good evening.
Sir, myself Priyamvada from Pratapgarh, Indora, Himachal. Sir, my question is that the major problem which I usually face in my class is that especially like we are dealing with the senior section. Juniors may we have the interactive classes, but when we talk about the seniors like ninth onwards, so students are quite reluctant to, to interact in the class. They feel hesitant. There are a number of factors because of that. They don't want to speak. So how being teachers, we like as I'm dealing with English subject, so what are the various things which we can enhance in our students so that they will be quite interactive in the senior classes also? This is my question, sir.
I have only one word answer for you. We have to use the language of possibility. the language of
Okay.
progress, the language of hope. And unconsciously, consciously, what actually happens when we enter into a classroom, we really become teacher in quotes. And the moment we become teachers, when I'm using the word teachers, what I mean, you jump into you as the king or the queen of the classrooms. Therefore, you are interacting with a learner who is less known than you. And my dear friends, we need to confess in this century that our learners are more educated, more informed, and more talented, more skilled than us. We must confess. And therefore, we need to stop understanding ourselves as more known and less known to a collaborative endeavor to establish that conversations. Probably with the experience what you have, you can develop that perspective in that conversations and the dialogues. I think that is the new skill that teachers need to have it. You need to make the conversations more meaningful and develop the themes and perspectives out of the conversations and link it to what is given in the content as the subject knowledge and the disciplinary knowledge. I think these are the skills which we need to master it. So the less of a teacher and more of a partner into the learning process, a member into the learning community. I think these kind of the ideas that really need to be understood properly and also practiced in the classroom. That really transform the classrooms and you see a drastic change in your interactions with your learners.
Thank you, sir. Another hard-hitting answer from you. Are our schools ready to believe that students actually know as much as they do, and now willing to take them up as partners, especially in senior age, where they are using all the AI tools and the tools before that with much more ease than teachers?
Pashu?
So, Sarika ma'am, you can
Yes.
ask your question
Good
now.
evening, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
And actually, it is we are really blessed that we are able to hear you, sir, because
Thank you.
this is a very interactive session, and I'm really thankful to my stars that I've got an opportunity to speak to you, sir.
Thank
Sir,
you.
my question is that there are some signs that which we should know that the task is actually effective. There are times that only a handful of students answer. The few take a seat back. So then the learning doesn't become impactful, though we try a lot.
Mhm.
There are some children who are not going to speak at all. So, how do we make our learning so impactful? I am an English teacher. So, definitely, it is that we converse more, we talk more. It is not always teaching. But still, there are times that we feel that, yes, our learning is not becoming that impactful, which it should be.
So what is your the basic answer to the question that you asked, according to you, as a practice teacher?
Because when I see the children, sir, that they have a question mark on their face, I understand. It is their body language that they have not understood. But again, they refrain from answering the questions. So sometimes it gets very difficult, sir. I take class 12. It gets very difficult to make them open up so that they ask questions.
So that this anything that you want to do something innovative initially becomes difficult and challenging. That doesn't mean that there is no educational value to that practice. What is most
True, sir.
important is if the learning is not in terms of scholastic alone, but the learning is developing that curiosity, the confidence, and many other aspects what we discussed. And there is a hundred, what you call experimentations of that kind is worth. Not only once, even you fail once and you leave it, rather than you try again and again because you know the value of that practice and value that impact that makes on the learners as lifelong learners. I think my sincere advice to all of you is even if you fail once, twice, thrice, doesn't matter. But don't give up your task of making your classrooms more engaging, more inspiring, and more what you call enjoying. These three important T's are very, very vital for our classroom practices, classroom communication. What is your engaging, you are enjoying, and you are empowering. I think these are the three important things that we need to do. And there is no a direct a solution to how to make it in our classrooms, how to make it happen in our classrooms. The solutions emerge out of our reflecting practices in the classrooms. And that reflecting practice requires your continuous conversations. And after all, education is a meaningful conversation with your learners.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
All right, sir, we have 5 minutes. Let me ask one question, which I have noted down. You have said that at one place on the left-hand side, there is we all are working for grades. But then you also said certain words like your class has to be engaging, inspiring, and enjoying as well. And we are doing all that for a student to become confident, curious, and courageous to explore new things. While we have all kind of assessment tools to see how much grade student have got, what kind of tools a teacher can have to see how engaging, inspiring, and enjoying this classroom was, and if they are improving day by day or week after week? Can we have a tool which they can use?
See that very interesting reflection from Himanshu. The engaging, empowering, and inspiring classrooms, when teachers constantly engage in creating such environments in the classroom, that itself is a learning for them. And the second aspect is those students who are getting inspiration, those students who are enjoying the entire conversations within the classroom, and those who are really empowered to take steps further independently, they also tend to have better learning outcomes. They are not the obstacles for learning outcomes at all. They are the determinants of the high learning outcomes. Therefore, this is the myth in the minds of most of the educators in the classrooms. They say the classroom teaching has to be in this particular order. And when you do in this order, then only you can see the learning outcomes of the students. But my dear teachers, let me tell you, this kind of learning is a very short term in nature. They only remember during the period of time they need to remember. But the long-term remembrance and the impactful of that learning for a longer duration of time is only possible when you make your learning more inspiring, more engaging, and more empowering. And it has a positive impact on the learning outcomes of the students in the larger canvas and the context. And I always say that, when you teach a particular subject, if you teach, probably your concern is to get a kind of an academic scholastic achievements in a set board examinations, of course, which is also important. But I always try to reflect what is the purpose of teaching the language. The purpose of teaching language is to enable learners to communicate their ideas, which can be understood effectively with others, with no difference of meaning. What is the purpose of teaching mathematics? Where the learner is able to solve the problems that he encounters in life. What is the purpose of science? The purpose of science teaching in schools is to develop that scientific temper and scientific attitude. And what is the purpose of teaching social science? It is to enable the learner to be socially sensitive, socially responsible. I think these things are vital to make a society more progressive. I think we need to have a shift from the typical teaching patterns to a transformative education. Thereby, keep this word always in mind. My teacher never talks, she only teaches. And that talk is a very a strong voice of a learner. And that actually talks about how our classrooms are dim and boring. We need to make it more encouraging. We need to make it more inspiring, and we need to make it more enjoying. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We have almost reached like 5:26 now. And if there is one more question, we can take it. Otherwise, I would say that this has been a very meaningful session for me as well. I got to learn some new things, and some old concepts also got revised. One takeaway which teachers can take with them is that there is no set pattern. There is no one lesson plan which, if you would follow, would do wonders for all of your students. You are the best judge of your students. So just go by what you feel. And if you will go by one lesson plan or one pattern, it is like a doctor giving just one prescription to every patient from morning till evening, irrespective of what disease they come with. So I think we have discussed a lot, sir. I would request you to give some more time some other day, because right now we are talking about what not to do and what to go towards. But how to assess the success of this, if we can have a separate discussion on the assessment part of it, I think that would also give some more tools to our teachers and school leaders. So I would request a separate time for that. But for the day, I think we can call it a session now. Thank you so much for your time. And everyone who was here is going back more enriched, and also with questions to think about. I think no, we should not ask or expect some silver bullets from professor, but as long as we are getting some questions to think and reflect, the session has solved its purpose. So thank you very much, sir. And I thank all of you who have joined this session. And I'll see you. Some of you are coming to IIT Delhi already, they have confirmed. And if you would like to join all of us and some more luminaries like sir for those 2 days, please contact us. With the conference is in December on 22nd and 23rd at IIT campus. And we look forward to have many more such deliberations over those 2 days. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And all the best. And wish you a very, very happy Diwali to all of you. Advanced Diwali wishes.
Sure. Happy Diwali to you as well, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Same to you, sir.
Same to you, sir.
Same
Thank
to
you
you,
so
sir.
much.
Same to you,
Thank
sir.
you, sir, and same to you.
Wish you the same, sir.
Wish you the same,
Wish
sir.
you the same,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. Same to you.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
Wish you a very happy
Thank you,
Diwali.
sir.
So much.
Thank you, sir. Happy Diwali.
Thank you, sir. Wish you the same.
Thank you.
दीपावली की अनंत शुभकामनाएं।
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Same to
sir.
you.
आपको दीपावली
Thank you
शुभ
so
हो।
much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir, and same to you.
Sir.
Happy Diwali, everyone.
Thank you so much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Happy
Thank
Diwali.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an interactive session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.